Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melisa Liberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to this week's episode of the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. This is Melisa Liberman, and today I'm so thrilled to introduce you to one of my long-term clients, Allison Jeffrey. She will tell you all about herself and share so openly the challenges and the wins and the lessons learned running her consulting business. She's in the strategic fundraising consulting space. I'll let her introduce herself in a moment. But I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of our conversation because it hits on so many different aspects that I know will be valuable for you as you think about running your own consulting business and hearing from Allison the challenges she's had that you likely have faced at some point in time, the way that she's been able to make mindset shifts so that it helped her to stop chasing the wrong clients, why she walked away from a high-paying engagement and what happened after she did that, how she's built a hybrid model with a dream fractional client. She shares with us the rituals and mindset practices that keep her business grounded, and how she runs a seasonal consulting business where she ramps down in the summer and back up again in the fall and winter, and her approach to relationship building as her primary pipeline generating activity. There's so much here that we cover. I can't wait for you to hear Allison's perspective. I think it really is valuable from two perspectives. Number one, Allison's generosity in sharing all of her behind the scenes and lessons learned from her own business and how she's grown this business and created such a lucrative and seasonal approach to the way that she runs it. And then secondarily, her experience in the fundraising space for nonprofits and how those skill sets and ways of thinking that she leverages to help her own clients to raise money and build their own pipelines is so valuable to think about how that applies to consulting businesses and the ability to create and maintain a successful pipeline. So without further ado, it's really hard to give this episode a proper introduction because we covered so much. So I'm excited to just dive in now and let you hear directly from Allison. Thanks for tuning in. This week, I'm so thrilled to have a special guest on our podcast. Her name is Allison Jeffrey, and she is here to share with us so much about the evolution of her consulting business and some of the strengths that she's got that I think are so you'll really relate to, and some of the challenges probably that she's been facing and how she's been thinking about them and overcoming them and whatever else comes up with in the course of our conversation. So without further ado, Allison, I would love it if you could introduce yourself to the listeners and then we'll dive in.
Thanks, Melisa. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm Allison Jeffrey. I live up in Canada. I'm in my fourth year of a strategic fundraising consulting practice. I work predominantly with mid-sized charities who need some support in injecting more professionalism and rigor into their fundraising plan. I also am a fractional chief development officer with an organization that I started with about 2 years ago now as a consultant, and we've developed that role into a fractional. So I love the blend of a pillar client where I play a fractional role and then other clients that work with me on a retainer or in a coaching way and with projects.
Is so such a beautiful business model to have that mix. And I know so many consultants really are striving to get to that place where they've got some recurring revenue and visibility and stability, and then that variety on top of it. It's an incredible business model that you've built, Allison. If you could just start walking us through, where you started off and how you've arrived at this place of having that enviable, I will say, mix of services.
Sure. And you've definitely played a big role in that enviable place that I'm in now. And I'm excited to share that with the listeners. During I'd say I guess the second summer of the pandemic, I was in-house as a director of development with a fantastic charity here in my city. And I was really feeling that languishing, I think was the sentiment of the time and the need for some change. So I ended up leaving that role with absolutely nothing lined up. And people would say, where are you off to? And I'd say, to my backyard, like with a book and a chaise lounge. I really didn't know, but I knew it wasn't fair to the organization and the donors and myself to stay when I really felt like it was a time for a new chapter. And so I started looking around, having conversations. And there was one role that seemed interesting, but it wouldn't have been a perfect fit for a couple of reasons. And I spoke with somebody I knew at the organization. And after about an hour talking, I said, well, Steve, it's possible I might just consult for a time. And he said, I had no idea that was even an option. He said, that opens up a whole new conversation. So fast forward, that organization became my first client. There was a new CEO, and she was absolutely a dream to work with. I actually credit her with me, first of all, becoming a consultant at that time and then staying on. I believe it was a 6-month engagement, and then I brought on other clients at the time. So although previously I had been contracting, consulting at other stages of my career, this was the first time, I think, 3 or 4 months after that, I, did the bold step of securing the URL and getting a website and business cards printed. So that really felt like I was formalizing that not only was this how I was going to get paid, but this was the presence and the expertise that I was developing and wanted to continue bringing forward.
I love that it's like the accidental and intentional entry into consulting. And tell us a little bit about then. So you landed those first clients, and then how did you go from there? How did you start, once you decided this is what you really wanted to focus in on? Tell us a little bit about how you started building up that practice and, how you think about acquiring clients.
Sure. I would say, like a lot of consultants, my first handful, maybe 2 handfuls of clients. And in 4 years, I've probably had 20 clients. So it's not a volume-based business by any stretch. So, within about that first year, I was letting people know what I was doing and taking more of a generalist stance. I would have to say that being in the fundraising space, I'm not a cost center. I am a revenue generator. And in that mid-sized charity space, there's almost always ways to come in and support in such a way that fairly quickly, I don't like the phrase low-hanging fruit, but there I've said it, that there are ways to support charities to build capacity so that they'll start to see returns quite quickly. And that's what I've built my reputation on throughout my career. And I was able to bring that through my network. And so coming up to about a year and a half in, I secured a client through somebody beloved to me in my network. And there were elements of the client that were appealing to me. One of the little bit of a warning sign was that the client really did want someone in-house. And they were having a hard time recruiting for that specific role. And I put forward 3 different offers, and they chose the deepest, longest, most roll up my sleeves. And it didn't take too long before the creep of staff augmentation started to emerge. And Melissa, what else was going on at this time? I was listening to your podcast very faithfully and getting your newsletter. And I had reached out to you and we started working together, I would say within 2 to 3 months. It was in a new year, 2 years ago. And at that point, I had actually offboarded that client. I fulfilled the 6-month term and I chose not to take a second 6 months. And I was really hurting. It was It was a tough engagement because it turned into something I didn't want. And I could never catch up to kind of rein it in. You were so kind and helpful to me right from the start and with some tough love. I'll say this, then catch my breath. I was describing the situation to you, and at one point I said, I just don't feel like the CEO set me up for success. And you put your hand on your heart and you said, Allison, we're new to each other, but with love, I can tell you it was not the CEO's job to set you up for success. And I thought, wow, this is session one with this new coach in my life. And she's had the courage to share with me something that there was an element of hard to hear and a huge amount of, I needed to hear that. And it was a turning point for me in how I viewed engagements and how I viewed qualifying clients and communicating with them, onboarding them. It was one of several really critical pieces of advice that you gave me.
So happy to be a part of that. I think you share something that's, I think, happens for so many consultants, Allison, which is we get started and we're excited, we land a few clients, and then things might start happening to us. Like you were describing, you started kind of going down the road of staff augmentation, not on purpose exactly, but that's how it ended up starting to trend. And so for you to be able to have recognized that and made a hard decision that a lot of us wouldn't make, which is not purposefully not renewing a client and believing in yourself enough, maybe not 1,000%, but enough to know, what, I can acquire another client that's more in the direction of, where I want to be heading. And one of the things that you shared was about feeling maybe at that time more of a generalist, which I think some of the listeners might be confused by because then you also said, I'm a fundraising consultant. So in some ways that feels very specific, but maybe to share with us a little bit about what that then looked like. How did you start becoming less of a generalist perhaps, and start leveraging some of the skills that you have from a fundraising perspective to grow your business and apply what as a business, to your own business?
That's a great question. Yeah, I would say when I first went out, hung the shingle and off I went, it was really with my functional skills as a fundraiser.
Mm.
So I would not always be in there implementing, but I was really giving, roadmaps. I was at least co-pilot with whoever the organization had in the seat. And in early days, I would say I wasn't even clear on that. And I likely was giving off some vibes to the internal staff that, the lines got blurred. And so as I was doing that, as I was supporting on the fundraising function, like I said, helping to get more focus and, more activation on different campaigns, different sizes, I was getting feedback from clients that went something like this, Allison, we're really appreciating your skills, your talents as a fundraiser. You're really solid in that area. And we've also had good experiences with other fundraising consultants who deliver in the same space you're delivering in. And I would get this beautiful, beautiful compliment that then they would talk about my strategic skills, my strategic orientation. So I had the functional skills from this strategic perspective and an ability to model that with the client. And predominantly I was working directly with the CEO and supporting staff. So I was starting to hear more Allison as a strategist, Allison as a coach, which really, that surprised me. I don't hold certification in that area, but I was seeing that a real need for that thought partner with the CEO, that ability to provide advice and counsel on an area that's extremely important to most charities, increasingly so with the development space, and how it would relate to other stakeholders, including the board, including volunteers, including leadership. And so that, then I started, perhaps not that I was overly a generalist before, but I guess I viewed it as moving upwards, enhancing my offer. Yes, anywhere I go, I'm a fundraiser. Then appreciating I'm a strategist and appreciating with certain clients, they do view what I have to share from a coaching and a counsel. So I didn't go out to design it that way, but I was getting that feedback early enough along that I could really start designing my offers with those added values.
You followed those breadcrumbs, and listening to what the market, what your relationships, what the people who know you and your clients were reflecting back to you about your strengths that maybe you didn't see initially. Tell us a little bit about how you do that, because you may not see this, but you have such a unique skill of eliciting that kind of feedback from people and getting them to tell you what your strengths are or giving you that kind of feedback, which not everyone has that ability. How do you think that you create an environment or a relationship that leads to that type of feedback, Allison?
Oh boy, thank you for that compliment. I think what's that saying about know, like, and trust? And so on the no side, I would say much of my business continues to be first degree, second degree connections and referrals. I would say probably that 80-20. So 80 comes that way. I think the likability, it's hard to be modest perhaps about this, but like I've always believed in like the person first. And if I'm being honest, that includes me. Yes, I want you to want to work with me on the business side because what I can do and what I can offer you. Fundraising deals with money, and money is not neutral. We all have stories to do with money. We all have family of origin experiences with money. And I work in a sector that, through little fault of its own, it's populated by sense of scarcity. And I have always had a sense of abundance. And so I feel first and foremost, I must have connection with the organization. I need to feel like the mission and the cause that they're working in is a cause that I hold passion for. Otherwise, I'm not the right person. And similar to that, I want to work with leaders who I also know, like, and trust. It goes both ways. I was reflecting, I'm a bit of a fan of the Enneagram, and I'm an Enneagram 9. And I see a trend, and it's not all or nothing, but I work best with Enneagram 3s. So CEOs who are 3s, that healthy competition, moving at a good pace, innovative, and the skills that I bring as an Enneagram 9 can really, really complement that. So that's critical for me, is that relationship between me and the CEO is solid, and that we've got mutual respect and we see each other's skills, see each other's values. And those are the engagements that there's almost no limit on how far they can go.
I think what you've just said is very rare with consultants who haven't worked on cultivating it, which is number one, that sense of abundance. And number two, I might reflect it back to you in that sense of you thinking of yourself as a peer to the client that you're working with. And really, there's a mutual qualification that's happening. You're not trying to convince them to hire you. You're working to figure out if this is a good fit for you and for them, for an engagement to make sense. When I say that back to you, what are your thoughts about that?
I immediately think, yeah, that's my debt of gratitude to Melisa
Oh,
Liberman.
oh,
I remember when we were starting to work together and you had additional resources, which is such a fabulous addition to the in-person online coaching around executive presence. And at the time, I had a feeling I knew what that meant. I had no idea what that meant for me and how I could cultivate that. And so I would say right from the beginning, on the heels of the CEO doesn't set you up for success. You set you up for success. Plus this work around mindset. And the way that you coach on mindset, it's so inviting. There's no sense of judgment or right or wrong. In fact, when I think back on our sessions, it was these questions you would ask that would start with, well, what if, possibility, potential. And they would really encourage me to trust myself, build more confidence, and have more presence. And I think with presence comes that sense of peer relationship and the opposite of one down. We're just beside each other.
Yeah. I wasn't expecting you to say that, but I'm so happy to have been such, a part of this journey, Allison. So it makes me thrilled to hear that work that we did on, really thinking of yourself as a peer and build, and I would say continuing to build upon the abundance, like you said, that was, already I think, part of your DNA. So valuable. I'm curious, when you think about one of the strengths that you have in your business, if it's okay to share this, is your ability to drive a pipeline, your ability to acquire new clients. One of the things we worked on, if it's okay to share this,
Sure.
but one of the things we worked on is you had taken a bit of a break or a slowdown, I think, in a summer timeframe, and then you were ready to ramp back up again. And you were telling me your pipeline was dry, and so you needed all this lead time to. You thought you needed all this lead time, and I said, no, I think you've been actually working. My recollection, you tell me what yours was, but something to the effect of you're always generating leads, you're always having conversations with people, you're always cultivating relationships, not for the purpose of having a pipeline, but because that's what you do naturally. And so you don't have a dry pipeline. So I'm just curious, as you think about sharing with other consultants who might not be quite as far along as you are in terms of that ability to create a pipeline and cultivate those relationships and keep it warm and acquire new business that way. Tell us everything. Tell us how to do that. That's a big question, but let's see what you say.
Yeah. And, some of this, there's overlap with the work that we do in fundraising, right? We have a donor cycle that starts with prospecting, qualification, cultivation when you ask for a gift, and then when you keep people close after you've asked, because A, it's the right thing to do, and B, you're hoping that they're going to give again and recommend the cause to others. And I think, I didn't see the analogy for quite some time with my business, but this is maybe a funny side note. Literally, I love and have always loved handwritten notes, pen to paper, live stamp, never use a postage meter, and write really from the heart of, if you can remember something about somebody's children or a trip that people are taking. And in the fundraising space, I kind of became known for that. And I would come across donors from 5-10 years earlier, and they would say, would you believe I still have that card you sent me? And they would describe it. And I, was just so flattered. So I found myself in my business doing those kind of things, pen and paper, sending articles on my work business anniversary in September. Since since year one, I've sent gifts to my clients from that year with personalized cards, and whether it's a Starbucks gift card or stickers and just things that are whimsical, because the business that we're in, it can be because it is intellectual and weighty at times. And God, the risks, what's at stake is a lot. This is revenue that needs to be generated in order to continue mission. And at the end of the day, these are leaders who, they're human beings and they carry so much. And so I always loved doing that. I remember that conversation too, Melissa. And, I'm going to put money on it that you didn't say your pipeline is not dry, but that you would say, what would it be like if your pipeline isn't dry? Is there a world in which your pipeline isn't dry? So you would always, you would be such a companion in helping me again pull out that black and white thinking and really explore. And I remember a phrase that I think conjoined that conversation. You said, Allison, there are sales cycles that are happening right now. And I think it was like 2 weeks later, I was at a conference and I was in the buffet line where people would go on each side of the table. And there was a CEO who greeted me and he said, I was hoping to see you here today. Do you still do, readiness for capital campaigns? Because you've been on my mind and I'm ready. We met each other 2 years ago for a coffee, but I would keep in touch with him.
Yeah.
And, he essentially offered me a contract across the buffet. So I sent you a note on Voxer and I said, okay, proof point. The sales cycles are indeed happening.
The sales cycles are happening all the time. Yes, because you have put in place such a relationship based process. And so even though there's not sort of opportunity A in a CRM, I notice for you and so many of us, every time we get into more of a transactional mindset, every time we get into more of I need to see X in order to get Y, we end up tripping ourselves up versus like really looking at this and thinking about it from a relationship perspective. And who knows where the next client might come from.
That's so, so beautiful. And I think I would have described myself as highly relational. And I mean, it has a selfish aspect to it. I'm so motivated. I'm so motivated by connection. Connection is really, really a fuel for me. And so, I give it because I need it. And I'll do almost anything if I can get connection. It really matters to me. And working with you, I remember I said at one point, I think I'm at a stage of my business where I need a newsletter. And I just proclaimed it. He said, oh, okay, tell me more about that. So I did. He said, okay, tell me more about why you think that's, there were at least 3 follow-up questions. And you never once said, that's not a good idea or that doesn't fit your business. But you really did get me thinking. And what I ended up doing through it was Flowdesk, one of the platforms. And I wrote something. I think I had maybe 250 people on the list from the years of connection. And I kept calling, and I would do it quarterly and tell a bit of a story and kind of softly how it related to what I was doing and my wish for people at whatever season of year it was and whatever season the reader was in. And then I would talk to you about them in our sessions and I would say, well, my newsletter. And at one point you said, Allison, they are so beautiful. I can't call it a newsletter. It's a love letter. And that also just made me feel not just seen, but that it was okay. It was actually more than okay because it was authentic to me. It was a very Allison thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know how you get a lot of compliments from so many people in your industry for that newsletter. And I think it just speaks to sometimes we get so trapped in this idea of what we should be. We heard this thing we should be doing, and we should be doing a newsletter. And then it ends up taking all of the uniqueness out of it because we're just operating on all these sort of check the boxes versus assigning it or marrying it up with our own unique perspective and what we have to bring to the table. And maybe the mechanism is fine, but if you had just kept going down that path of I better do this newsletter and I'm not as consistent as I should be, and maybe I should have a better call to action and all the things that we hear. And sometimes I'm sharing them on this podcast, but for you and your business and for all, everyone that's listening, we have to take the lens of what makes the most sense for us as a human and us as our unique, what we have uniqueness to bring to the table and what really would resonate with our ideal client and marry that all up together versus trying to follow whatever the rules are.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. And I mean, one of the things that crossed my mind too, when I talk about connection and when I talk about relational and love letters. And at the same time, I'm a fiend for data. I'm a fiend on pricing theory. I'm a fiend, like, I love that side of the business as well. I run a pretty tight ship on, the mechanics of the business. And I think, and I've been aided on that from yourself and other professionals. And I think that having the confidence that the foundation is strong, then it just gives me that runway to be more creative and to really pursue my purpose. For 2025, because I love alliteration. And so I said, okay, high level goals for 2025, the three P's for me. And so they're presence. We talked about executive presence, purpose. I'm in a heart space of the nonprofit sector, and I work with organizations whose missions I'm just crazy about, and then profitability. And so there's, like anything, big Venn diagram there, and I try and work in that center space. Those are my real drivers, my real North Stars.
Which is so helpful to have. It's so easy to get down in the weeds. One of the things you just mentioned, Allison, and I'd love to pull the thread on a little bit more is that strong foundation. And as you think about the strong, when you said that, what came to my mind is you have a very seasonal business. Not only do you have a seasonal business, and you could tell us more about what that means, but also I think you've purposefully created seasons in your business where you want to ramp down in the summer sometimes and ramp back up in the winter. You live in Canada, so maybe that was part of it. And so as you think about that and that ability to ramp up and down, it requires a strong foundation. It requires a lot of confidence that, that you can, or even the confidence you were sharing a bit ago when you decided to tell a client that the engagement had come to an end and that, and to open the space up for other types of clients that would better meet your qualifications. So tell us a little bit about that, the way you think about seasonality, both in your clients, but also in your business.
Well, fundraising, I'm sure won't surprise anybody. September to December is 75% revenue for most charities, that holiday giving, that United Way campaigns. And so, really, from September 1 to clock strikes midnight on December 31st, it is really full on. So, I do identify the patterns of that seasonality, and I try and prepare, I try and block off a getaway at least once or twice during that period of time. Maybe the first couple of years in business, Melissa, I came, I turned the calendar and things were quieter for a month or two and then back up. And then last couple of years, especially since I retained the pillar client with the fractional role, so that it has its busier times, but it's continuous. So I would say certainly September to December, very full on. January till about May, end of May, still full. And so I am a big believer in habits. I'm a big believer in not just routine, but ritual. And I find lots of hacks along the way to keep me going. And then the eye on the prize is knowing that I'll probably dip down to about, last year with some fabulous holidays and other personal things, I was probably at about a 0.4. And then it doesn't slowly ramp back up, or it doesn't slowly, it can be quite sudden. And I also find that those are transition points that require a lot of not just preparation in terms of, buying some things in bulk so you don't have to run out of your face cream or whatever, but also the mindset. Yeah. Like grieving what you're leaving behind, even if what you're leaving behind is a really, really fertile period of work. As consultants, I'm sure we skew towards high work ethic, high passion for productivity. And so, transitions are tricky, and I'm learning to prepare for them more.
Yeah. One of the things you just said was about the mindset side of this. And sometimes I think that's such a broad term and what it really means. When you think about some of the ritual or some of the focus that you have on mindset, what does that mean to you, Allison? Why is it important and how do you manage it?
I do a lot of writing. I have in the past actually written a letter to that season
Hmm.
as the season is closing off. And so I thank the season for what it allowed me to do. I thank the season for the lessons that it gave me. I thank the season for the profitability that it enabled me, and kind of those bigger shoulders of the year. And then I write a letter to the new season. And so I find I also work best when with mindset and with rituals like that, where I can inject a degree of kind detachment that I am not that season. I am not my work. We have a relationship. We give to each other. So that's one thing that really works for me is taking the time, slowing down as much as I can. And it's so, so tricky, but slowing down during those transitions. And if it's things like during, busier work periods, these are the things I have on my desk. When the season changes, I add different things to my desk. So it's visual, it can be wardrobe, it can be things like that. What I do with my calendar, how I intentionally block off time for myself, time for my family. I'm a bit more rigorous. And I use this phrase frugal with my calendar, which means that's not really the season to reach out and ask if we can go for a coffee so you can pick my brain because my brain gets pretty expensive at that time of year.
Yeah, I love that. Frugal with my calendar. The other thing that really stands out with what you just shared is the abundant mindset, because a lot of us want that constant confirmation or constant external validation that our business is going well, that we'll continue to have clients. But when you're in a more seasonal type of a consulting business like yours, it requires a lot of that type of abundant thinking that okay, I can ramp down this in the summer because either that's my client's cycle or my own cycle that I want to run or both of them, but and have the trust and confidence and abundant mindset that it won't be a problem to ramp back up in the in the fall as an example.
And I would say it wouldn't be fair to say that this arrangement is purely a product of my great thinking and anticipation. I have landed a pillar client that is just second to none and really is such a critical piece of this arrangement. So if other consultants were seeking my advice on like those fractional roles to even out and hedge against some of the volatility, yeah, I actually think I could probably give some good advice on the things to look for because I think I was looking for something similar with that client that it did turn into more of a staff augmentation situation, which, I'll own more of that. But there are clients out there that really will continue to treat you as you are treating yourself as an expert, as bringing, significantly more value than you're charging for, who will allow you to have some variability in how much you're working at what times of year.
Mm. So now you've opened up a topic we have to dive into further because I think the listeners are likely on the edge of their seat wanting you to explain that this is kind of the holy grail for most of us to have some form of a retainer client who doesn't have us in the weeds all of the time as a staff augmentation but really looks at us from an advisory retainer perspective strategy. You mentioned some of the advice that you might think of as you're sharing that type of business model with the listeners. What would it be?
I did open it up, didn't
Ah,
I? Here we are. I would say, in situations where I've seen it work and now I'm having lived experience with it, we still took it slow. The organization had had a very long time employee who retired. And then there was a very strong effort to not just replace that role, but elevate the role to chief. And I was actually recruited in. That was a very long sales cycle, actually, now that I think about it. And I had thought after a certain point it wasn't going anywhere. And it was. And so I was brought in to try and coach their second hire into the role. And there was some success. And then eventually that person exited the organization. So I initially said I would step in and try and steady the ship with the team. With fundraising, this is a strong position that I hold, and I'm not alone, that if a consultant solicits, so asks for donations, they should only be doing that for one organization. And so there is value to that when you have a client that you know that you're going to be making a long enough term commitment to them, that you can be that one of the faces of, definitely a face of the organization with the philanthropic community. And so, I think like what you said earlier about that, like that I think I became an accidental interim CDO. And I had this back to mindset at one point, does this make, if I become an interim, at the time it was an interim fractional CDO, like, I don't like the language, but like, is it a sellout? Do I have to hand in my consultant badge? And I remember talking it through with you, and you were so validating and not just giving me your answer, but really helping me to see, no, this is actually, be intentional. Like, allow yourself to be intentional with how you're designing your business. And a business design like this can still be a consulting business. In fact, it's proving to be a model that I couldn't imagine not having.
Mm, yeah. So back to breaking some rules, maybe. Yeah. So good. Two more topics. So been so generous with your time here today, Allison. Another topic that I think might be really interesting to cover here is one of the things that I think you're really so strong at is that networking. And you and I, before we started recording, we're talking a little bit about a trip that you had taken to Toronto. You wanted to, I think, start generating some and re-energizing perhaps some business relationships in Toronto. So we were talking a little bit about you taking the trip out there and what that was like. And so for a lot of consultants, the idea of going to events or even just, investing in some kind of trip for in-person networking and what that can result in your business. Is there anything around that you might share as a technique that other consultants could leverage?
Yeah, thank you. I enjoy going to conferences. I
Mm,
enjoy group settings, but my favorite dynamic is one-on-one.
mm,
Truly, I'm an introvert. I'm an outgoing introvert. So I love people. I love spending time together, good quality time, back to connection being a prized commodity. And so I think it's been a practice of mine for so many years, even before I was formally a consultant. I would never dream of going to a city without thinking, who do I know there? And reacquainting myself with them. And I mean, I'm not just thinking like, a sorority sister. It was with a business mindset. It was with I want to keep those connections. I want to hear what people are doing. I want to have insight into people's journeys. And so, yeah, a couple of years ago, there was a donor who I had known for many years, living in Toronto, and she was getting on in years, still active and vibrant and feisty. And I just had a feeling, I hadn't seen her for quite some time with COVID. And I just had a feeling that no matter what, I wanted to see her. And so that became the center of the trip, was to go out and see Margaret. And then, once that got booked, I think I booked at least 10 things in 3 days. And, I took this very like capsule wardrobe. So I didn't have many costume changes, and I took lots of pictures, and I was kind of wearing the same thing in each of the pictures. And it was so rich. And among the 10 women that I met with, most of them knew each other or knew of each other. And some of them were saying to me, oh my gosh, you saw her. I haven't seen her in years. How she's doing. And so it was hilarious being kind of an outsider coming back to a city I used to live in, and then updating some people on each other in just this really robust way. And most of us have worked in the women's space, most of that group for so many years. And so the depth of our connection is deep and long. And I rarely metabolize it in real time. And, as time passes and I head back home and I write some letters to people and I reflect and then I don't want to say out of that trip, I got 3 deals. That's so transactional. That's not what it was. But reminding each other of what we do and what we want to do, the name comes closer to top of mind.
Yeah. And I think a few things that I see from an external perspective that are different about the way you think of these types of events or trips or networking and how others might think about it more commonly, which is number one, and I, first of all, a nervousness of I better figure out exactly the right thing to say. I don't think, for the most part, that that's the way you're thinking of it, right? You're thinking it much more about connection. It's not about practicing a way of describing what you do or trying to nail the right elevator pitch or whatever it is. It's all about how do I connect with someone, listen to them and talk with them in a way that they understand, what you're doing and you're understanding what they're doing. And then also that it's not transactional in the sense of I'm going to go to Toronto and in order to make this trip worth it, I better come back with, X number value in my pipeline or that kind of thing. It's more of you trusting that by going out and having that kind of one-on-one in-person interaction that ultimately something will come of it and not trying to manhandle, whatever those relationships are, what the interactions result in.
I like how you have reflected that back. One thing that came to my mind, again, a tie back to my line of work, major gift work, the average cycle to initiate the process of qualifying a major donor and to the point where, you ask them for a gift and they say yes, that can take 12 to 18 months. And I've known that my entire career. And so when I started in business, and I had some, air quotes, quick wins because as many of us, the early contracts, engagements were coming from people who knew me. So the cultivation phase of that was abbreviated, but there have been times like as I was sharing the pillar client, I had thought that the sales cycle had ended, that I had, had 2 or 3 conversations. I had done a soft proposal. I had followed up a couple of times. And then I presumed, she just is not interested and, I'm not going to get that formal no. I'm just, this is the signal that it's a no. And all in, that did take about 12 months from the time we first started talking. And so it is so hard to be patient when you want something so badly. And you could see how much you could be of service and how wonderful it would be to have that client. And so that's something I continue to work on, because when I feel myself being led by impatience or being led by kind of some harsh language like, oh, that's not going anywhere, move on. Yeah. I think that's when I try and pay attention that other things are likely at play.
Yeah. Oh, I think that clip alone, we could all just save off and replay every time we're feeling impatient about knowing are we going to be able to work with this client or not? You just never know when the timing might be right. And cultivating a sense of patience is definitely part of this business model. Allison, this has been incredible. And I love this, I'll call it a full circle moment, maybe of, having we met each other through the podcast and having you to be so generous to come on to the podcast and share your experiences and your insight and your unique way of running a consulting business is so, so valuable. I'm so glad we've memorialized this, and thank you so much for being here. As we're wrapping up, is there anything that we didn't touch on today that you wanted to make sure the listeners heard?
I'm so flattered that you asked me. Life is funny. I remember thinking, I don't know if I have anything really worthwhile sharing. And now I'm on a roll and I could talk for another hour. So just huge gratitude to you, Melissa, for everything that you've done for me, that we've done together. Our story is not over. I admire you. And I did want to say how thrilling it was for me to be working with you during the period of time that you were writing your book. And just how delighted I was to see that be published and your name on it, and you sent me a copy. And you really are, you're a talent and you're a wonderful human being.
That means everything to me, Allison. It's such an honor to know you and to work with you and to call you a friend, my friend.
Oh,
yeah.
Right back at you.
Amazing. Well, thank you for being here. If anyone wants to find you, is there anywhere you might steer them?
Oh, yes, I'd love that. My website is AllisonJeffrey.com. That's ALISONJEFFREY.com. And I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and I love writing there too. So please DM me and send me a link.
Amazing. Well, I will give you a plug, which is you're very good on LinkedIn. So if anyone's listening and wants some tips on how to post on LinkedIn effectively and authentically, and go check out Allison. So, and be in touch with her if you feel called to do so. And we'll put the link to those in the show notes as well.
Thank you, Melissa.
Yes. Thank you for being here. I truly appreciate it. And look forward to everyone hearing this episode.
Likewise. Thanks again.
Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melisaliberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.